Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're investigating one of the most powerful, invisible forces shaping our lives. Have you ever noticed how often we stay trapped in endless cycles of bad decisions, kind of just looping over and over again, simply because we don't know how to stop? Well, today, we're going to expose the hidden psychological glitches that lock us into that loop. And more importantly, we'll learn exactly how to break free and finally just walk away.
Picture this scenario. You're at the theater and the movie is just terrible. I mean, the plot is completely incoherent, the dialogue is wooden, and you're already checking your watch. Your brain starts playing this fact on a fast, inescapable loop. You want to leave, you know you should leave.
But then, a counter thought flashes in your mind in bright, heavy letters. You've been watching for 40 minutes, right? You bought the ticket, you made the trip out there. All that time and money, it's gone. So you start telling yourself that if you walk away right now, it's a complete waste. And so, you just sit there, sinking deeper and deeper into a really bad experience. So, I have to ask you directly, why can't you just turn it off? Why do we stay chained to a failing path when literally every piece of evidence is screaming at us to walk away? That hesitation, that paralyzing inability to just cut your losses, that is the core behavioral glitch we're dissecting today.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1. Trapped in the loop.
So this is the sunk cost fallacy in a nutshell. A sunk cost is any resource, whether that's time, money, or emotional energy, that is already gone and absolutely cannot be recovered. When we fall into this trap, our brains drag the heavy burden of past spending into our forward-looking decisions. We stay to get our money's worth. But the rational marginal view, which is really the mindset of that silhouette decisively walking away, dictates that the money is gone regardless. The only question that logically matters is this: will your future actually be better if you stay or if you go?
Which brings us to Part 2, the neuroscience of escalation.
The real culprit here is rooted in a fascinating concept called loss aversion, famously established by Kahneman and Tversky. Basically, our brains are hardwired so that losing something feels roughly twice as painful as gaining that exact same thing feels good. Think about that. When we quit a failing project or walk out of that bad movie, we force ourselves to crystallize the loss. Continuing, on the other hand, allows us to maintain this comforting little fiction that our investment might somehow still pay off. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens under the hood. When you face a sunk cost, fMRI scans actually show that the insula, that's the part of your brain driving negative emotion, lights up like a Christmas tree, making abandonment feel viscerally painful. Meanwhile, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which handles all your rational value computation, it actually powers down, literally. Your emotional brain completely overrides your logical brain, actively suppressing your ability to make a rational, clear-headed choice. Now, you might be sitting there thinking you're totally immune to this, but the research on who actually gets trapped is super fascinating. Surprisingly, highly agreeable and conscientious people are far more susceptible, simply because they strongly internalize the social rule to never be wasteful. Similarly, folks with a lower childhood socioeconomic status learn very early on to fiercely protect their investments. On the flip side, older adults and those who practice cognitive reflection, meaning they actively pause to override their gut intuition, are actually much better at decisively walking away. Let's scale this up. Part 3. Billion-dollar sunk costs. Take a look at the Concorde. It is such a textbook example of this bias that economists literally call it the Concorde fallacy. The British and French governments threw $2.8 billion at this supersonic jet over the span of decades. And the crazy part? They knew very early on that it would never be commercially viable. But they had already invested so much money and honestly so much political prestige that they just couldn't bring themselves to pull the plug.
Over in the corporate world, this trap is just as deadly. A staggering 70% of corporate mergers fail to achieve their expected value. Why? Well, because once a CEO commits millions in due diligence and publicly announces a massive deal, their ego gets completely tied up in it. When huge red flags start popping up, instead of walking away, they escalate their commitment just to protect their identity and justify that initial massive investment. We've seen this play out recently on a massive scale. Meta lost an estimated $70 to $77 billion on the metaverse before an investor rebellion finally forced them to cut budgets. Think about it. When a CEO literally renames their entire company around an unproven concept, that is the ultimate personal identity fusion. Admitting error threatens not just a strategic business bet, but their very identity, which amplifies the sunk cost trap to a catastrophic multi-billion-dollar scale.
And honestly, it happens in tech all the time.
A whopping 66% of massive IT projects end in partial or total failure. Managers encounter huge, glaring problems, but instead of cutting their losses, they just throw good money after bad. It becomes this vicious, self-reinforcing cycle where every single new dollar spent becomes yet another justification to just keep going.
Researcher Barry Stahl perfectly captured this phenomenon in his classic 1976 study, calling it being knee-deep in the big muddy. His research proved that when leaders are personally responsible for the negative consequences of a project, they are significantly more likely to double down. They'd rather throw more resources into the mud than face the psychological pain of admitting they steered the ship straight into the swamp in the first place.
Moving on to Part 4, Subscription Dark Patterns. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the precise language tech platforms use when you try to leave. Your profile's watch history and My List will be lost. See what they did there? They are reframing a simple commercial cancellation into the destruction of your personal creation. They're deliberately triggering your loss aversion, making you feel the pain of losing your curated lists, even if you literally never actually use them. This all builds into an entire ecosystem deliberately designed to monetize your cognitive biases. They add cancellation friction, making quitting a multi-step nightmare. They exploit the status quo bias with default auto-renewals, just relying on your inertia. And they explicitly use sunk cost framing, constantly reminding you, hey, you've already invested 6 months. Now, while these dark patterns absolutely do artificially extend retention, the research shows they ultimately foster deep resentment. You aren't being loyal, you're just trapped in their loop. Finally, Part 5, The Art of Walking Away. So, how do we actually step out of the silhouette of the trapped consumer and become the figure decisively walking away? Well, here is the rational playbook. Step 1 is definitely the hardest, but it's absolutely crucial. You must mentally write off all past investments. They're gone. Step 2 is to ask the fresh start question. If you were starting from scratch today, with zero history, would you choose this exact same path? And Step 3 is Bayesian updating, which is just a fancy way of saying you must let new, negative data actually lower your confidence, rather than stubbornly clinging to your original, sunny optimism. Because let's face it, our emotions will absolutely betray us in the heat of the moment. We need pre-commitment strategies. You have to set explicit kill criteria before you even begin. Something like, if we don't hit 1,000 users in 6 months, we stop cold. Time box your investments. Keep a detailed decision journal so you can't conveniently misremember why you started in the first place. And honestly, appoint a devil's advocate to actively argue for quitting. You are essentially making a binding pact with your rational self right now to overrule your future highly emotional self.
There's a legendary story of how this works in practice. Back in 1985, Intel was bleeding money in the memory chip business. The founders, Andy Grove and Gordon Moore, were completely paralyzed by their historical attachment to the very product that built their company. So Grove turns to Moore and asks, if we got kicked out and the board brought in a new CEO, what do you think he would do? Moore said, he would get us out of memories. And Grove replied, why shouldn't you and I walk out the door, come back in, and do it ourselves? It's brilliant. They mentally fired themselves, escaped their massive sunk costs, pivoted to microprocessors, and literally made history. Which brings us to the final, stark provocation I want to leave you with today. I want you to look at the path you are on right now, whether that's in your career, your investments, or even your personal life. Strip away the time and the money you've already spent. Knowing exactly what you know today, would you choose to start this current path all over again? Because if the answer is no, it might just be time to break the loop and simply walk away.